From the ashes of World War I, Adolf Hitler attempted to build a sinister new world order, led by a so-called race of Aryan supermen, spreading a reign of terror unlike any the world had ever known. Many believed the Nazis conjured strange spirits and followed occult practices that had lain dormant in Europe for thousands of years. Now documents prove that their beliefs were based on a perversion of ancient pagan law, a twisting of mythic battles between forces of light and darkness, and a terrifying journey into a world ruled by mystics, madmen, and murderers. The Himalayas of Tibet. In the 1930s, the Nazis began searching the top of the world for evidence of ancient high priests who they believed were their blood ancestors. The Nazi belief in these ancestors was to form the foundation of Germany's new religion, a religion with Adolf Hitler as its high priest. Inspiring Hitler's evil crusade was a belief that pure Aryan blood was being contaminated by so-called inferior races, and that once rid of foreign elements, a new race of Aryan supermen would rule the world. This was the Nazi interpretation of ancient myths and occult lore dating back thousands of years. To prove their superiority, the Nazis would leave no myth or religion unexplored, in effect borrowing from any belief they could adapt to the Aryan cause. As a foundation for this new faith, Hitler needed to eliminate competing religions. To achieve absolute control, he not only used the power of myth, but co-opted Christian ritual. His inner circle, who had strong ties to the occult, would help him to accomplish this goal. Among them were Deputy Führer Rudolf Hess, whose correspondence reveals a devotion to astrology and forecasting by the stars. Nazi Commissioner for Philosophy and Education Alfred Rosenberg, who wrote the book laying out the tenets of the Nazi religion. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's Minister of Propaganda, whose diary records his use of astrological forecasts in planning the war against the Allies. And Heinrich Himmler, head of the SS and the Nazi death camps, whose personal papers reveal that he was the master occultist of the Third Reich and ultimately the architect of the new Nazi religion. At the foundation of this new religion was an ancient occult legend that tells the story of a continent somewhere in the North Atlantic. There lived a race of super beings who had fallen from grace through evil and vice. A great flood wiped these beings off the face of the earth. But before they could all be destroyed, certain priests escaped by boat, eventually finding their way to India and the high peaks of Tibet. These escaped priests, believed by mystics to be the original race of Aryan godmen, were said to be the ancestors of all Indian and European people. The land was called Atlantis. Certain German mystics claimed the Atlantis myth was actual history. Their proof that Aryans were the chosen people descended from the super beings of Atlantis, and that they had lost their powers by mating with mere mortals. In these theories lay the seeds of Nazi doctrine. Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler, an extreme nationalist, made it his mission to prove that the Germanic peoples were the descendants of the Atlantic master race.
Nationalists, particularly those who believed in the superiority of the Aryan race, always had entertained the notion of a vanished island, a hidden world, some kind of utopia. Himmler may have thought it was in Tibet, and that this master race, the Atlantic master race, as Himmler liked to call it, might have been in the Tibetan mountains. Descendants would still be alive.
Himmler believed the occult legend of Atlantis was true. That the mythical super beings of Atlantis eventually made their way from Tibet to northern Europe, and that their descendants became the Nordic or Aryan races. Government-funded expeditions under Himmler's direction were sent to Tibet, searching for evidence of their ancestors. To document this process, Nazi researchers took this film footage. In 1946, in a post-war interrogation by the US Army, the SS scientist who led one of the Tibetan expeditions described his first meeting with Himmler. He said, "Himmler mentioned his belief that the Nordic race did not evolve, but came directly down from heaven to settle on the Atlantic continent, and that ancient immigrants from Atlantis had founded a great civilization in Central Asia."
Although he was a very rational, calculating power broker, he was also a romantic idealist, and he certainly believed in these myths. Otherwise he wouldn't have spent the money and the time and the energy he did sending expeditions to Tibet.
In Tibet, villages were subjected to full-body inspections by Nazi researchers, looking for what the party called Aryan physical traits. Narrow foreheads, long limbs, and angular features.
And this, of course, was stepped up by the time the war was on, in that by this time they were able to do experiments of a rather still innocent type on the living object. What I'm talking about is measuring people's skulls, for instance.
The quest to prove the superiority of the Aryan race soon moved into the criminal. The Nazis would begin killing people and using their bodies for experiments. They believed that once they had proven that their ancestors were gods, it would be a simple step to recreate this race of Aryan godmen through selective breeding.
That you could somehow force human evolution in a sort of hothouse environment by selecting the parents of it.